There's a saying that maybe we get the government we deserve. And I'm not sure that that's entirely true. Maybe we're just victims. But the point I want to raise is that we're talking about politics at a provincial level and the concept of democratic renewal. But I think we need to look at that in a much larger, holistic fashion about the other forces that are in play in the world. And that can explain some of the things we're seeing. Since the advent of mass media, citizens have become increasingly dysfunctional. Chomsky coined the term the opiate of the masses. And right now we can pick your drug of choice. I mean, right now the people that should be here are at home watching their 54-inch flat-screen televisions or doing something else that doesn't really contribute in any way. So I think that maybe what we're seeing really does reflect the values of Albertans. And this notion that somehow if we just do it differently, we're going to attract those people to our cause, I'm not convinced of that. Now, having said that, I don't think they're that way inherently. I think they've been trained like good lab rats for the last 6 or 7 decades. And the reason the right-wing parties are so successful is because they reflect the values of affluent people and corporations or people that want to be like them. And everyone else is sitting at home watching their flat screens or going, you know, we don't care. And the youth aren't coming in because they don't see the relevance. So how do you put the context of, this is the question I suppose, how do you put the question of democratic renewal into the context of some of these larger forces that are happening in our society and what we're not seemingly acknowledging?
That's such a complex question.
I think I'd like to hear suggestions from the audience. I mean, as Phil already said, this is a pressing problem in the whole democratic world. And, you know, ostensibly we're off, we the West are fighting wars in undemocratic countries so that they can become democratic while we're becoming less democratic. So it's a very serious problem, and any and all solutions will be offered. I think that the school system, not to put everything on the school system, probably a lot of young people who turn out come up because their parents are interested, I would guess. That if you come from a political home, you're more likely to be politically interested. But I do think the school system could be doing quite a bit more to encourage civics, since it's largely taught in grade 6 when kids are a long way from voting, and could be emphasized a lot more in grade 11 and 12 when they're actually going to have an opportunity to vote. But that's just one idea. I'd like to hear some more.
Well, I don't know that I have some ideas, but I do think that we shouldn't beat up on ourselves too much, because there are a lot of little groups that are working, not all together, but on different causes. And there are the tools now available. You know, for example, I'm reminded of this young man, sadly he was an anthropology student, not a poli-sci student, who set up that Facebook page, you know, against prorogation of Parliament. And, you know, he very quickly got people interested. However, you know, I mean, that might just be at a very superficial level. What I think is really lacking is an understanding of how the system works, so that when, for example, the Conservatives said what the Liberals and the NDP are trying to do is treason when they came up with a coalition thing. People didn't understand how the parliamentary system worked, didn't know that it's perfectly legitimate for opposition parties to get together and form a coalition, because they have more members among them than the Conservatives. So they believed it, and the Conservatives mounted a very strong sort of propaganda campaign, and people don't understand how the system works, so they swallowed it. And then it became a kind of regional issue within Western Canada. You know, this is a Conservative party, this is a bastion of conservatism, they're trying to overturn the election. And I think that it starts with education, but that takes so long to actually show results that in the meantime people are distracted by Facebook and Twitter and all of these other, this technology, the most distracted young generation in the history of the human race. So who can blame them if they see politics as dull, if they see politics as unnecessary, irrelevant to their lives? They'll move on to something else.
Just to be clear, by using Facebook, I was able to get 400 people out for the anti-prorogation protest in front of Stephen Harper's office. So those tools of distraction are also great leveling tools in terms of reaching people and bringing them the message.
Yeah, well, that's what I
To
said.
actually create concrete, actual people feet on the ground, not just membership
Yeah.
on Facebook.
The internet will both annihilate us and save us.
Yeah, this is very interesting stuff, all right. I agree that education is absolutely huge here, and I want to try to restrain from giving you a rant about the power of big corporations and wealthy people. But we realize that there's something called freedom of expression, which we all have, and thank God we're able to express and to exercise that right. But there's also something called freedom of the press. And that's wonderful if you happen to own one. I am quite distressed at the lack of coverage that meetings like this seem to get in this province. Quite distressed at the lack of access to the pages of opinion in the newspapers. Quite distressed at some of the editorial comments, which it seems to me are quite unfair and biased, although, again, as Doreen tells us, we should not romantically worship the past, because if you read some of the 19th century newspapers about politics in Canada, you would be dismayed and appalled at the vulgarity and violent vitriol that cartoonists and editorialists used against their political opponents. So I just want to say hello to today, which we have actually made some progress. And speaking of progress, I do want to end on a hopeful note here. I think that it's easy for those of us of my generation to be appalled at the political apathy of the younger generation. But I've raised several children, and I want to tell you that they and their friends are dynamic, intelligent, and committed and devoted individuals who I am very happy to turn the country over to. They may not like electoral politics, and in fact, a lot of us get jollies out of making cheap shots at politicians. But they are committed at grassroots, NGOs, at anti-racism, anti-war, peace demonstrations, all sorts of things, which they are showing us how to help bring about social change. They're more accustomed to being on the street and doing it. I'm more accustomed to being behind a mic and talking to nice folks like you, but both are necessary, and I'm here to tell you that there's an awful lot of capable people under the age of my age and under the age of 30 who are just going to blow our socks off in the next 20 years. And like whoever it was who said about the internet, it is an enormous tool for good. Look at how Obama used it in raising small donations from people like us to raise a historic number of dollars. And I know that there's a lot of junk on the internet too, and I'm very worried about that. I'm very worried about the lack of civility among the blogging community. I read very few blogs because I find them to be self-indulgent quite often and abusive. But at the same time, I read very penetrating good stuff on the web, and you look at the Velvet and the Orange and all those other revolutions which were enabled by the internet and electronic communication, and it's awfully complicated and it's awfully tough, but we've got some real opportunity. And so let's go out there and let us be fruitful and multiply.